scariest day of the whole year is coming up in just a few days. I'm, of course, talking about the election. But before that, of course, there's Halloween, which is where we're going to put our focus tonight. So sit back, relax, enjoy a cup of whatever it is you're drinking, and thank you for having me into your homes, your libraries, your bedrooms, your kitchens, wherever you're watching. Halloween is by far my favorite holiday. It has been since childhood for so many reasons, but chief among them, in childhood anyway, was trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating, I loved it. I love the fact that my sister and I could practically fill a pillowcase with candy in about 3 hours of working the neighborhoods around where we grew up. It's a tradition with a lot of old world roots, but very much an American invention. And I got sort of caught up down this research rabbit hole just this morning, and I wanted to talk a little bit about trick-or-treating. We all know it. We all love it. Challenge, of course, is how do we get it done this year, if at all? But the memories, right? The memories. And I remember when my sister and I grew up in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and we would trick or treat for hours until the neighbors turned the lights off and told us to just go away, and would come home and dump our candy on the floor. And my parents, of course, made us look through it because we're looking for all the needles and razor blades that we never ever found in any of those candies. And then my parents also taught us a little bit about charity. My dad would tell us, you should put half your candy aside for the poor kids in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where my dad worked. And we would put all, half the candy aside, including the peanut butter cups, I don't like to throw the word hero around, but I even gave up my peanut butter cups. The old roots of trick-or-treating, of course, go back to a time when Halloween was known as Samhain, the Celtic New Year. And the date, October 31st, is no accident. It's not arbitrary. It's what's called a half holiday. It's halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. It's a magical time when the Celts believe that the world of the living and the world of the dead, the veil is at its thinnest, and ghosts and monsters and imps and fairies can come into our world and meddle in our affairs. So they would light bonfires, leave out food offerings for the dead, and dress up the children as those ghosts and monsters in the hopes that those creatures that come forth wouldn't snatch up the kids and bring them back down to the underworld. Those are the earliest roots, of course. And year after year, generation after generation, it's carried on. And the Celts are not the only people who talk about this day having significance for the dead. Of course, our Spanish friends, Dia de los Muertos, coming up in just a few days as well. The veil is thin. We talk about it. Horror movies come out, all this other wonderful stuff. I'm insanely busy during October talking about my favorite subject, and it all dates back to that one event. Now, trick-or-treating. An American invention, even though its roots go back to around a bonfire in Ireland. So what happened was a lot of Irish came to America, and they brought a lot of their traditions with them, including, of course, jack-o'-lanterns and so much of the great Halloween tradition. One of the traditions they brought was something called Mischief Night. Mischief Night, great fun, right? They would go around on Halloween, October 31st, and they would pull pranks, maybe like, open up a barn door or do some sort of harmless things. And then in the morning, you blame the ghosts. Well, the 1920s roll around into the 1930s. The Great Depression's going on. The whole world, but especially the United States, is in turmoil. And those pranks were getting destructive. They were breaking windows. They were smearing manure on homes and things like that. It was not going well. So civic groups start to organize. And they say, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to organize, and we're going to give these kids some sort of treat to not mess with our businesses. And it was not a nationwide decision all at once. I had a deep dive into the newspaper archive today. I just wanted to share a couple of headlines with you. I love this. So this is from October 31st, 1938 in Oregon. Police force enlarged for happy, harmless Halloween. They discuss about how there will be kids trick-or-treating, of course, but there's also a lot of pranks going on, and the police force is out there. All across the nation, it was not understood. October 31st is a time where you need to have candy and treats and bags of pennies on hand for children. For example, I love this one. In Green Bay, folks weren't happy about it at all. It's time we settled once and for all this matter of tricks or treats. It was sprung on us last year, sprung on them. Imagine back in 1938, folks show up at your door and say, hey, we want some candy. And you're like, what are you talking about? Sprung on them. Sort of a takeoff of the Capone gangster blackmail era among the younger generation. How dare they? But as we know, things do catch on. And the tricks or treats becomes more of an annual thing. Sears and Roebuck gets involved. They start producing costumes and little pre-bags of candy and things like that. And next thing you know, there's no one in America who doesn't understand that October 31st means you better have some treats on hand, because kids are going to show up and they're going to make their demands. So really, this whole trick-or-treating thing was born not just from this amazing holiday with all the ghosts and all the other stuff, but born from this tradition of going around and saying, hey, I really want to do some mischief. I want to pull some pranks, but I don't have to pull some pranks. If you were to say, give me something, I would be willing to forego the pranks. Maybe some candy, maybe a little bag of pennies, an apple even. God help you if it's a toothbrush or something like that, but a treat. So really, trick-or-treating is quite simply the world's second oldest profession. Extortion. That's all it is. We carry it on proudly to this very day. This year, in my neighborhood, we've decided that for trick-or-treating, we're going to put tables out at the end of our driveway with candy on it so the kids can approach at a safe distance, get their treats, and move along. Keeps the eggs off my house, and I appreciate that. Back to the poor kids in Bridgeport, just to wrap this up before we really get into the program tonight. When my sister and I would give those half our candy, even the peanut butter cups, over to Dad for the poor kids in Bridgeport, I recall one year, I was a little bit older, and I was in Bridgeport visiting my dad early November, and just visiting for some reason, and his bottom desk drawer was half open when I showed up, and I walked up and I said, hey, Dad. And I looked down. Poor kids in Bridgeport? Poor kids in Bridgeport? Dad just beams and smiles, teaching us another valuable lesson about charity. Some charities have a lot of overhead. In this case, this was a very corrupt charity, taking 100% of the proceeds for themselves. Always teaching us lessons, dads. Dad also paid the dentist bill and the orthodontia bill. So now that I'm a dad, I sort of understand where he's coming from. So my name is Jeff Belanger, and I love the unexplained. I grew up in a New England town, born in Massachusetts, raised in Connecticut, live in Massachusetts again. And I had friends who told me from a young age that their homes were haunted. And I was intrigued by what that meant, because it wasn't like a horror movie. There was no blood coming out of the walls. No heads were spinning around. Nobody vomited pea soup, not once. It was just more matter of fact, more someone lives here with us. Please don't tell your parents. They'll think we're crazy. I went to school to be a writer. And around Halloween, you go looking for haunted feature stories. And I loved interviewing people and finding out that sometimes the history backs up these eyewitness accounts. And then I started a website in 1999 called ghostvillage.com, 21 years ago, almost this very night. And then I started writing books, and I started working on the show Ghost Adventures back in 2008. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight too. I've worked on every episode of Ghost Adventures since the first one on the Travel Channel. 12 years. That's a long run for a TV series. I've written books, and of course, the New England Legends podcast and TV series. I am so blessed that I get to look for ghosts and monsters and things that bump in the night all over the world as my full-time job. And for that, I'm grateful. And I'm grateful for you to be there in the audience, because without you guys, I'd have to get a real job. And no one wants that. The thing about ghosts, I completely respect people who say, look, the jury's out. I've never seen one, so I don't know. That's a fair position to take. It really is. And all views are welcome here tonight, by the way. If you're a hardened skeptic that got dragged here by someone, be welcome. Enjoy the stories, enjoy the history, enjoy the pictures. If you're a believer and you've had your own experience, again, you'll take what you will out of this. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything, but I know For myself, I did not grow up in a haunted house. I didn't see ghosts all the time as a kid. I'm not psychic or sensitive. I don't know the future, and I can't read your mind. I can't at all. But I do know that seeing is believing. And the first time I saw a ghost happened in Paris, France, just as you heard in the introduction. And I wanted to tell you about that if I could. So Paris is a beautiful place. If you ever get the chance to go, highly recommend it. Its history dates back almost 2,000 years to when it was a Roman outpost. And there was all this incredible limestone, perfect for building with. And over time, they built a town. And a town slowly expanded until it became a small city. And the city grew. And they kept taking that limestone and making more buildings. Over time, the city sprawled out. And then when you build a city, of course, you put the cemeteries on the outskirts of town. And that is exactly what they did in Paris. You put them on the outside of town, and then Paris keeps growing. And to get to the limestone now, they have to start tunneling underneath the city. And those cemeteries that were on the outskirts of town, over centuries, it's not the outskirts anymore. It just sprawled and encircled those cemeteries. And they're tunneling all underneath Paris. 300 kilometers of tunnels by the time we get into the mid-1800s. And those cemeteries are overflowing with humanity. There's no room left to bury the dead. Corpses are rotting on the ground. The smell is awful. The putrid waste is spilling into the streets. And some of the buildings, these big, tall, heavy buildings on top of hollow ground, are collapsing. The ground underneath is just crushing. And they know they have to solve two problems. They have to close those tunnels and empty those cemeteries. So I'm there in 2003. This was a business trip when I worked at a whole other life. And I got to go over there for work. And some of my colleagues spent the day going to the Musée d'Orsay and the Louvre and all kinds of other beautiful places, the Champs-Élysées. And I said, I'm going underground. I'll catch up with you later. So it was just me. And as I walked down below the city into these tunnels, it's dark. It gets quiet, except for the drip of water that's just coming down through the limestone and the crunch of gravel under my feet as I make my way through this tunnel. I'm about 6'2". There's spots where I have to duck to get through. There's places where you make lefts and rights and so on and keep moving. And I know what's supposed to be down here, but I haven't found it yet. And then I round a corner and I see a doorway that says in French, "Stop. This is the Empire of the Dead." And I know I've arrived. When I walk through, I'm greeted by millions of human skeletons all around me in a very macabre, intricate pattern. There's retaining walls of leg bones and arm bones and skulls that form various designs. There's signs that tell you where the bones came from, but that's all we know. For example, this one, these bones came from the cemetery of St. John. They were brought down between 1846 and 1847. But that's about it. That's what we know. And I started thinking about cemeteries in general. Usually each person gets their own headstone, or at least a family has a stone. It's like your last voice that identifies you were here. That was taken away from all these folks. They're just pushed into one collective voice. And we know disturbing a place of the dead is a universal taboo, but living people always take precedent. That was true in France as well. And the only way I figured they could show some respect was to make it somewhat beautiful, make it somewhat intricate in this design of the wall that just goes on for, by the way, miles down below. And behind that wall is just a pile of humanity, just bones, skulls. Every one of them was a human being. I saw Valentine hearts made of skulls. I saw crosses made of skulls. And finally, I get into this long hallway where it's just straight down, about fingertip to fingertip wide. I could touch skulls. And I'm walking down, and suddenly I stop, because there in front of me, I see a shadow the size of a man come from the right side, go to the left, and move back again. And I froze. And I went, wait a minute. I'm down here alone. And then I thought, okay, maybe there's a little side tunnel up ahead, and I haven't seen someone's down here with me. But then I look, there's no side tunnel. It's just straight all the way to the end. And in this moment, I realized if that's not a ghost, I don't have another word for what it is that I saw. Everything changed in that moment. At that point, 2003, I'd interviewed hundreds of people about their ghost experiences. Now, thousands. But in that moment, I realized the reality of it came crashing down. I believe I saw a ghost. And all those experiences of people I'd interviewed before, I always took the position, well, I believe that you believe, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. But there, I knew. And it took days, weeks, months to sink in. And as I make my way through, and this is the way out, by the way, I had to keep going. I get back up to the top, the city of Paris again. It's loud and noisy again. And there's a security guard. And he says, I need to check your bag, because I had a bag with me that had my cameras and had my some recording equipment in it. And I opened it and I said, usually they check you going into a place, not coming out. And then I went, oh my gosh, you're looking for bones. And he turned around, he pointed to a table behind him and he said, that's from this morning. And there was like a skull on there and a couple of leg bones and arm bones. So people are still disturbing a place of the dead in Paris, where I had a game changer. I didn't get this from there, in case you were wondering. I did not. I've had the chance to work on some incredible cases all over the world. Many you've heard of, some you've never heard of, every one of them important in some way, because when we explore haunts, we're really asking a big question. Is there life after death? Biggest question people have ever asked. And sometimes certain places haunt us because of something that took place. Historic events can leave a scar, or at the very least, a stain that can never be washed away. One of those places is in Long Island, New York, a place called Amityville. I think a lot of us have heard of the Amityville house. There it is. Well, there it was back in the 1970s. I went to school in Long Island. I went to Hofstra University. My freshman year, I had a friend. You're making new friends. And, oh, where you from? I'm from Amityville. And I went, oh, really? And he said, yeah. Do you want to go see the house? Yes, I want to go see the house. And you drive by Ocean Avenue, and there it is. Those windows aren't there anymore, those telltale windows, but there's the house. Nice upscale neighborhood, homes very close together. But there it was. Here's the thing about this house in particular. November 14th, 1974 at 3 a.m., Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. went into this house right here, went upstairs to his parents' bedroom with a loaded Marlin rifle and shot and killed them both in their bed. Then he walked down the hall, went into his brother's bedroom, shot and killed both of them in their bed. Then he went further down the hall to where his two sisters were sleeping, shot and killed them both in their beds. 6 people murdered that night by their brother/son. That happened. It's a fact. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. is in jail this very minute for the crime, still alive. And after that, as you can also imagine, that house sat empty. No one wanted to buy it. I'm into this stuff. I don't want to live in a house like that. Please no. I need a break too. So who would buy a house like that? It sat empty for almost a year until finally someone did come along who was willing to buy it. His name was George Lutz, wife Kathy. See, they had both been in separate marriages and they'd gotten divorced, sold their other houses, and they figured they could pool their resources and buy this nice, big, expensive house that had come down considerably in price because of the horrible thing that happened there. And George will tell you, they knew what happened there. They were aware. They weren't bamboozled or anything. But George said, to quote him, houses don't have memories. Houses don't have memories. I would agree with that. But people do. We have memories. I had the opportunity to interview George Lutz extensively about everything Amityville, from the summer of 1975 all the way to several years ago when the third movie came out. We talked for hours about every detail because that's all I could do at this point with this case, right? Is hear from the horse's mouth, the person who was there. No secondhand, none of this. It was the person who was there. And we spoke for hours. And this turned out to be the last big interview he ever gave on Amityville because After this, the third movie came out, and he was involved in his 13th lawsuit. So he had a gag order, and then he died. But I wanted you to hear a little bit from him exactly what happened. So at first I asked him, okay, you move into this house and you know this horrible thing happened. When do you start to notice something weird is going on? This is what he said.
There was a number of times that I would think a clock radio or something went off downstairs. I heard what I can only term as a marching band tuning up.
Right.
And at one time it sounded that they had rolled up the carpet because there was so many footsteps down there, so much noise. And you go running downstairs to see what it is or what caused this, and you get to the landing, halfway down, and nothing.
Right.
And the dog would be asleep. And here's a young black lab, and they're hyper, and they just don't sleep through stuff. They wake up.
So imagine that. You're in your bed, you hear something going on downstairs, you know you got to get up and investigate. So you go down the stairs and the dog's asleep. Well, now clearly the dog is basically telling you, it's in your head, mister. It's not me. It's not out here. It's only up there. So he thinks he's going a little bit crazy. Turns out in the coming days, other family members have similar experiences, just weird stuff going on, and they're afraid to talk about it because they're going to think someone thinks they're nuts. But pretty soon they do start communicating. Pretty soon they do start talking about the strange stuff that's happening and realize, oh man, maybe something is going on here. And of course, every one of them knows the horrible murders that took place in the house just a year before. So then I asked him, so you know what took place? You know weird things are happening to not just you, but everybody else. And do you make efforts to just stay out of the house, work long hours, stay away for the weekend, anything? And he gave me an answer that really chilled me, still does to this very day. This is what he said.
I got very sick there. I lost a lot of weight there. Part of it was just didn't want to leave the house.
Right, okay.
Kathy described it later as the house was charming. And we would invite people over instead of going to see them, friends.
Right.
There came a point when we invited people over to make sure that to see whether we were crazy or not, because when they sat in the kitchen and they could hear the steps up going on, the people walking around upstairs after the kids had been put to bed.
Right.
They could hear the footsteps also.
I see.
And we'd all go up and find the kids fast asleep. Just no way it was the kids.
Right.
And when they confirm that for you, then you almost want to break down and say to yourself, say out loud, I'm not crazy.
The house was charming. 6 people murdered in it. I don't care how nice of a house it is. The house was charming. God, that's frightening to me. And of course, now it's getting worse. And so for 28 days, the Lutz family lives in this house. They put up with this. And according to George, he said, eventually he was talking to a priest friend and said all the stuff that was going on. And the priest said, is there some place you can go and just get a good night's sleep? And George said, yeah, Kathy's mother's house isn't too far away. He's like, why don't you do that? Just get a little break from the house. And they did. They packed a few things for overnight. They went to Kathy's mother's house and they said it followed them. Whatever the mysterious thing in this house is, it followed them. But it had like a half-life. Each day was half as bad as the day before. And according to George, they never went back. They left all their stuff, food in the fridge and everything, and they moved to San Diego. This movie was coming out not too long after I got the chance to interview George. His plan was to go to the premiere and get arrested. That was his goal. Not a lofty goal, pretty easy to do, really. This was his 13th lawsuit, all related to the ability to tell his own story. And George took great issue with this movie because it says right at the bottom, right, based on the true story. I know they all say that, but it gets so blown out of proportion. There's a scene in the movie where George Lutz, the character, takes an axe and hacks up the family dog in this weird fit of rage. George Lutz, the man, took great issue with that. He said, wait a minute. We had a dog, the black lab. Love that dog. I would never harm that dog or any person. That dog went with us to San Diego, and I'm being portrayed mutilating an animal. He's like, I'm not okay with that. And so that was his 13th lawsuit and final. This was a guy that went through something. Imagine your whole life being told you're a liar by people who weren't there. And that's what he dealt with his entire life. And it made him a little bit tough, made him a little bit abrasive. Like, how dare you? You weren't there. This is my story. What he described was nothing like the movies, was really even nothing like Jay Anson's book, The Amityville Horror, but in some ways even more frightening, because a real haunt slowly chips away at you. There'll be hours, even days of nothing. Then it starts again, just when you start to relax. That, to me, is real horror. When we chase the paranormal, I'm always looking for evidence. I want something I can show you. Something I mean, the stories are great. I love the stories. I think they're profound and important, but I always want something I can show you. And there's a sort of quasi modern day ghost photo that's one of the most famous. It gets talked about in the same circles as the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall and so many others. And it was taken in Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, which is a well-known haunt in Illinois, right outside of Chicago. And I'll just show you the photo, first of all, taken with infrared film, not digital, film. There it is, August 10th, 1991, taken by Judy Huff. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is a curious little boneyard, not very large. And Judy said she walked in with a couple other paranormal investigators in 1991. And she said, and I can verify this, I've been there, you can just pan your head a little bit and you can see the whole cemetery. If anyone's in there, you'll know the second you walk in. It's all fenced in. In fact, there you go. It's fenced in. There's nowhere for anybody to go. If someone's in there paying respect somewhere, you're going to see it. In 1840 is when it got its start. And there are 82 plots, which is not really a very large cemetery. So I got to go there. It's at the end of this little dirt road, little short walk. And I saw the actual stone that apparition was sitting on, which Judy said, by the way, was not there. She was just clicking pictures, and that's what she got. But I got to go to the cemetery with Judy Huff. She's the one who took the picture. We got to talk about it. I even got to look at not just the positive, but also the negatives. There they are. And it turns out she just walked in with her infrared camera and went click, 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 click. So almost taking like an old school panorama back before the cameras could really do that. And this just turns up. There was no woman in a dress. And there you can see her at the very edge of the negative. And there it is through the loop. This photo has made the rounds because unless they're lying to us, and I can't promise they're not, I wasn't there, but gosh, I know I know Judy, I know the other people that were there, and I know what they were doing. They're looking for ghosts. They're not looking to fool anybody. Judy doesn't make any money off this. There's no money to be made taking a ghost photo. It's just putting yourself up for ridicule. And this photo's made the rounds. And then as I looked around that stone in Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, right across from it, there's another stone which has become quite visited, just infant daughter. And people are leaving toys and flowers and trinkets and things like that. And it just tugs at your heartstrings. You can't help but fill in the gaps between that apparition of a forlorn looking woman and infant daughter. You can't help but wonder, what's the connection? I mean, it's easy. It's an easy backstory to write. The truth is we don't know. We don't know. We have no idea. But boy, it tugs at your heartstrings. One of those places where I never like to just take anything at face value. If I'm going to look at something, I want to know every piece of it. And that includes going there with the photographer, picking it apart from every angle, because that's what we do. But the story's powerful too. And to me, I think that's the thing that withstands the scrutiny, because all of us have human experiences we can't quite explain. Now, for my skeptic friends tonight, for all of us really, but I want to address a question that no one's asked yet, but I like to pre-ask once in a while. And if you'd indulge me on this one, I would like everyone to close their eyes for just a moment. And I want you to take a mental picture of yourself. Stand outside of your body and just view yourself. Picture it. And be somewhere where you're comfortable. That's it. Just Got the picture? Okay, good. Open your eyes. Come back to me. Questions for you, rhetorical, because I'm not going to hear your answers. Did anyone picture themselves naked? Because often there is an exhibitionist in the bunch. Did anyone see their feet? That's my other question. Or, I'm guessing, the overwhelming majority of you just pictured probably your torso up. And you were probably clothed, like a 99.9% chance. If you did see your feet, one or two of you that might be jumping up and down saying, wait, I saw my feet. I did say somewhere where you were comfortable. And my next question would be, were you laying on the couch and you saw your feet down there at the end? Maybe. But for most of us, we're dressed. Maybe you put on jammies, sweatpants, evening gowns, whatever. It's your vision. You can have what you like. And the reason for this little thought experiment is I get asked a really good skeptical question. Why aren't ghosts naked? Why? Maybe a person has a soul or a spirit, but their wedding dress, Civil War uniform, blue jeans, suit and tie, whatever. How could that be? It's a great question. Solid question. I can't tell you, most of the stories that I hear about ghost encounters are often related to family. They're not frightening. They're usually quite comforting. So, for example, grandpa dies and he appears before his grandson a week after his death, looking elderly, but healthy and clothed. Thank goodness. That same person appears before his widow, looking 30 and in the prime of his life, still dressed. Maybe, just maybe, these things are a projection of what they want us to see. And they know we want to relate. We want to be able to connect. And if they're naked, it's going to get weird fast. Weirder fast. Maybe, just maybe. I believe ghosts are a message, and a message without a recipient is no message at all. It's just yelling into the void. So for the recipient to be receptive, it's got to be recognizable. It's got to be comforting. And it can't be too weird. So our ghosts wear clothes. Connecting messages, as a matter of fact, are also a big part of what got me into all things paranormal as a kid. Because when we went to those haunted homes, some of those, my buddies' homes built in like 1760, predated the country, some of these old houses. We would bring along for the sleepover Ouija boards. Some of you are probably vehemently against them, which is okay. I'm not here to convince you otherwise. But there's something about this incredible piece of Americana that I want us all to understand. Tons of us have played with them over the years. There it is, Ouija board. The thing about it is that it's a brand name. Ouija it's like calling a Xerox machine. Xerox is an actual brand name. Kleenex is a brand name. It's a talking board. That's the generic term, or a spirit board. And they've been around really since the latter half of the 1800s. They're a byproduct of the spiritualist movement that started in 1848 with the Fox sisters hearing strange knocks on walls. That was me tapping my microphone, lest you think you're crazy. I think the spiritualist movement might have died out if not for the US Civil War. With thousands of people dying these untimely deaths, people wanted answers. And their ministers, their priests didn't give them satisfactory answers. And so they turned to mediums, psychics. And then some of those folks were charlatans, of course. So the spirit board promised, hey, take it out of the hands of the charlatan, put it in your own hands. And the Kennard Novelty Company in 1891 launched the very first one. There it is. What's the name mean? Even that's a mystery. Ouija, oui, yes in French, ja, yes in German. One of the theories. There's so many. However, the reality is it's one of Kennard's friends actually named the board. But they always left it an enigmatic mystery. And there were others. Turns out during times of turmoil, there's a lot of interest in this kind of stuff. World War I, World War II. Here's some of the many competing boards that came out, but none of them grabbed the market share of Ouija. That was the kingpin for sure. And they weren't dangerous back then, not in the 1910s and 1920s. It was a parlor game. Not just a parlor game. It allowed you to kind of get a little bit saucy, really, because it works best if you put it on the knees of opposite gender people and you get really close. There was no Twister back then for teenage parties to get freaky. There was Ouija boards. In fact, it was so innocuous and fun and good spirited, it even made it to the cover of one of the Saturday Evening Posts. Yeah, Norman Rockwell, that guy. Look at, not dangerous, not a gateway or portal to hell, just a parlor game. And look at the two, their legs are touching, their fingertips are touching, and she's looking off like, Grandma, are you there? And he's looking at her like, whatever, baby, we're close. Just a parlor game. There were other products too. Ouija oil, Ouija jewelry. In 1967, the Ouija board outsold Monopoly. My goodness gracious. Lots of these things are in existence. But the reputation turns dark in 1971 and then gets a bigger shot in the arm in 1973 when this guy, William Peter Blatty, writes this masterpiece called The Exorcist, made into one of the best scary movies ever. Now, again, based on a true story, right? Very loosely, but still, you smarty pants know there was a boy. They called him Roland Doe, Doe being the anonymous last name, like John Doe. And Roland Doe was a kid from Maryland who went through a series of exorcisms in St. Louis. And those exorcisms were pretty well chronicled by the church. The priests kept notes and things like that because it was an extreme case. And that case was eventually made as, the notes made their way to William Peter Blatty, and he kind of used it. Now, there's one little remark that the boy Roland used a Ouija board with his spiritualist aunt Tilly, but no one ever really blamed the Ouija board. The only house, the only building left standing of everything related to the actual real case of Roland Doe is a little tiny house in St. Louis, which is where the boy stayed when he was out there with his aunt and uncle getting those series of exorcisms, because exorcism is not just a one and done thing. It's a repeated process over and over. And when you find yourself in front of the exorcist house that very few people know about, there's not much to do except, take a selfie. Father Bowdern is the guy that took all the notes. He's the one that conducted these exorcisms. It was this big vanquishing, this horrible thing, and then eventually it was over. And the boy goes on, and the movie gets made, and everybody's afraid of Ouija boards. But St. Louis still holds on to this thing. See, the final parts of the exorcism took place at the Alexian Brother Hospital. And in fact, if you go to the City Museum today, which I did, not today, but recently, the cross that hung outside the door or outside the window of the room where the boy stayed is on display among all kinds of other oddities. There it is. The Exorcist. And now, of course, Ouija boards are dangerous. I don't believe there's anything inherently dangerous about cardboard and plastic, but I do understand these things have the power we give them. And that's just how it works out sometimes. So if you're afraid of a thing, if you're afraid of a kitchen knife, you may not want to use the kitchen knife. If you're afraid of a Ouija board, well, maybe it makes sense to stay away. But I think the power's in us. It always was. And what I love about them is there's only 4 possibilities, right? I'm pushing it, you're pushing it, we're somehow collectively pushing it, or something else. I get all kinds of stories from people, emails, everything is great. I appreciate everyone sharing their tales with me. Once in a while, I get a story that doesn't quite fit neatly into a box, and we can't help it, right? We put these things into boxes. And this was the first one I ever got. One that is a strange ghost story. See, this guy named Jeff Vashon was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and him and his buddy, this is back in the August of 1997, him and his buddy wanted to go play tennis. That's all. So they were driving through. He thought there were some tennis courts near this neighborhood where he was going. He's making some lefts and rights, and then he sees a cop standing on the street corner. And so he pulls his car up and says, "Hey, officer, I'm looking for the tennis courts." And he said, the officer looked a little weird, like a little old fashioned, a little out of place. And they said the officer looked at them a little weird too, like, you guys are strange. But the cop said, yeah, the courts are just, a couple blocks down, and then make a right, and there they are. Thank you. And they're on their way. They pull up right where the cop said, pull up in front of the tennis courts, get out, and the courts are full of people playing tennis, all dressed in tennis whites. It's 1997. They're like, these guys are just in like t-shirts and shorts, whatever. everybody's in tennis whites. And they're like, is this some kind of like, like the old timer baseball groups? Is this some kind of like old time tennis thing that we don't know about? And they get out of the car and they're like, the courts are full. I guess we're going to have to wait. So the next thing they knew, the whole scene disappeared. Every person and the tennis courts vanished. And it was like a parking lot and an empty field. And they look at each other like, what just happened? They'd later do some research and learn that there were tennis courts there that came down in the 1960s. So they were gone a long, long time. And he said, I can't explain it. Did I see a bunch of ghosts? He's like, but if anything, I was the one out of place. I was the ghost. We'd call them kind of like a time slip, a slip in time, an idea that you see a scene and you're even in the scene from, it doesn't belong there right now, but you're there. And then it's over. It's such a strange world, stranger than we can imagine. From Cambridge, I wanted to tell you about an eerie legend. An eerie legend. I spelled that right, actually. Stay with me. About a general they call Mad Anthony. Mad Anthony Wayne, as a matter of fact. This is a great legend because it's so specific. It takes place in Pennsylvania, a state we're probably all going to be paying attention to next week, I imagine. Every year on New Year's Day, they say the ghost of Mad Anthony Wayne rises up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and goes all the way across about 300 miles, all the way to Philadelphia every New Year's Day to his family plot in Philadelphia. And they say he's searching for his bones. Searching for his bones. Crazy story. Mad Anthony Wayne is one of these very colorful historic figures dating back to the Revolutionary War. He's fearless. They call him Mad Anthony because during one battle with the British, he had been taken a saber to the head. He's bleeding profusely. He'd been shot, and he's still leading the charge, covered in his own blood, absolutely enraged, leading his troops to victory. They said the guy's crazy. He's absolutely mad. He liked it. Stuck. Mad Anthony Wayne. Fiery personality, and one of those people we just remember. General Mad Anthony Wayne. Thing about Mad Anthony Wayne is in 1795, he's in Erie, Pennsylvania, and he gets sick. And he gets sick and he dies. And so he's buried actually right there. That's called the Wayne Blockhouse. And he's buried inside. And he rests there for 13 years. But that never sat right with the family. See, his whole family's from Philadelphia. And they said, God, I hate the fact that Anthony's up there in Erie. He should be here in Philadelphia with his family. And so after 13 years of him resting peacefully up there in Erie, and respectfully, of course, he's got a whole building around him, family heads up there in a little carriage to gather his remains. They send a letter and say, listen, have him ready because we're going to be taking him back. So this doctor in Erie helps exhume the body of Mad Anthony Wayne, and he boils it. And he keeps the uniform, keeps the flesh, which is quite decomposed after 13 years, but there's still stuff to it. And they take the flesh and the uniform and put it back in the ground. And then he takes all these well-cleaned bones and puts them in a box and gives them to the family. And the family takes them 300 miles diagonally across Pennsylvania in an old carriage, an old sulky carriage. And they say that along the way, some of the bones fell out. Whether true or not, I don't know. Legends have a funny way. And then all the way back to the family plot, which is where his bones are buried to this very day. But his uniform and whatever is left of his guts are still there in Erie, Pennsylvania, inside that blockhouse. Right by there was the original coffin lid. There's his tombstone. My God, a guy buried in two places. And that's me waiting New Year's Day, waiting for him to rise up because I don't want to miss it. Imagine that Imagine that photo bomb. Like you're ready with the selfie and Mad Anthony Wayne right behind you. Last year, something really cool happened to me. Yet another reason I believe in ghosts. It was late September 2019, and my phone rings. I've got caller ID, like most of us, and I see that it's the U.S. Postal Service. And the U.S. Postal Service from Washington, D.C., like headquarters, They've called me precisely 0 times in my life. This is the first. And so curiosity gets the best of me. I can't help it. I pick it up and they said, "Hey, Jeff, we're going to be issuing a Halloween stamp this year." And I said, "Oh, cool, great." And they said, "We'd like you to speak and be the keynote speaker, the person to unveil this Halloween stamp at this year's thing." And I'm like, "Listen, October's crazy busy for me." Um, they said, "Let me show it. Let me show you the stamp." So they emailed me the artwork and stuff. And I went, "All right, this is really cool." I said, "Okay, I'm in. Let's do this." And we went to a little town called Milford, New Hampshire, which is where they were having this big reveal. There's this huge festival going on, and the U.S. Postal Service, I didn't know what to expect. All I know is I've got 4 minutes to say my speech, and I was very excited about it, which I'll get to in a second. So I get there, and like this stage has been erected just to unveil the stamp. This is a really big thing. There were all kinds of people there. I met a guy from Tennessee. He's like, "I came from Tennessee. I've been to like 30 of these things, 30 stamp launches." It's a huge like thing. And there's a big muckety muck from the US Postal Service. And there's like the mayor and local dignitaries and so on and all this other stuff. And I said, wow. So I got to pull the rope. There it is. That's us unveiling the stamps. And, you know, here's a closer look. I sat with the muckety muck before we start from the US Postal Service. And I said, "Hey, I'm really excited about this." He's like, "Yeah, thanks for doing it. It's great." I said, "No, I think it's really cool because this is the first time the US Postal Service has put a ghost on a stamp." And he went, "Oh, okay, whatever." And I'm like, I get it. You know, the decisions was made like well below your pay grade. Yeah, it's fine. That's why I'm here to help. And then I started looking around some of the signage and stuff. Check it out. Cats, bats, and spiders. Oh my. I'm like, that's 3 of the 4 stamps. You very specifically left 1 of the 4 stamps out. The ghost. See, I know from experience, ghosts, it's a weighted term. People, it puts some hair up on people. It gets people upset, some folks. But whatever. This is why I'm here. So anyway, I get to do my speech and I'm so excited because like it's filmed, it's live streamed for all the US Postal Service. There's tons of people in this audience like waiting to get their hands on the very first issue of the Halloween stamp. And there I am talking about it. I talked a little bit about the origins of Halloween, which we discussed a little bit earlier. And I said, "Look, my name's Jeff Belanger and I believe in ghosts. I believe in ghosts." And I said, "Because I've seen one. I've seen one on a stamp." And then I looked over at the muckety muck on the stage and I said, "And the US Postal Service, they believe in ghosts too, because if you put ghosts on an envelope, they'll take that envelope all the way across the country for you." And then I look over at him and I see this sort of look on his face. It's just like, "Oh, did we just step in something and we didn't see this coming?" And after it was over and we were chatting and stuff, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, that's great. That's clever. That's funny. Okay." And thinking like this will blow over. And then the next day, of course, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, like tagging, the US Postal Service believes in ghosts. Do you? Hashtag Halloween stamps. And then that starts getting retweeted and shared and all the other stuff. And they did not ask me back. They did not ask me back. Can't say I blame them. Anyway, my life's an adventure. I love it. I love anything to do with ghosts, haunting, strange legends and lore, because I believe these stories have something to teach us and they have a connection, way to connect one person to another. And so I love talking about it. I really do. I think we can all pull little pieces of whatever we need out of these stories. I want to leave you with one more tonight before we ride off into the sunset, and I'll be happy to take your questions after this. It's a story that hits eerily close to home, sort of fitting, I think. It's a story about a vampire in Rhode Island, and it's about a plague that turned us all into monsters. A monster. The story takes place just behind this building. That is the Chestnut Hill Baptist Church in Exeter, Rhode Island. And if we're to believe not just the legends, the lore, the folklore, and the locals, but the newspaper reports, there's a vampire buried back there in the graveyard. Now, about the plagues, as we know and have been reminded constantly recently, plagues have been around before. They'll come around again because that's what they do. They just happen. The plague that went around this time, we're talking about the 1800s, the latter half of the 1800s. The plague that was around in these days was something called consumption, also known, well, tuberculosis. You might know it better as tuberculosis today, but consumption was brutal. It could kill you in a matter of weeks. It could kill you in a matter of months, matter of years. And of course, some people lived with it the rest of their lives. And when medical science can't find an answer for you, when your church and clergy can't find an answer for you, folklore sometimes has an answer as to why one family has nothing happen and another family just across the street loses everybody. It's a vampire. Vampires have always been around during times of plagues. That's what they do. Now, today, when I say vampire, you're probably thinking of like sparkly teenagers who are just beautiful, right? Or maybe Count Von Count, or the way vampires have been depicted in the movies, or maybe you're Nosferatu if you're a little more of a classical movie monster person. The reality is Bram Stoker's Dracula is the line in the sand that changed everything about vampires. After Bram Stoker, vampires are these alluring sort of creatures. But before that, they were nothing like that. They weren't alluring at all. They're walking corpses that drain the vitality, the blood, the life out of the living. Stop the vampire, and you might save the living. They've been around during the bubonic plague. They've been around through every plague ever. That's what happens. So back to the plague in Exeter. Now, here's the thing. Locals understood contagion. They're not total rubes. People know when one kid gets a cold in the house, pretty soon everyone in the house has a cold. It was true now. It's true then. They knew that. But this consumption thing was different. You start wondering, well, wait, this is a good God-fearing family. We go to church. We pray really hard. How come we're ravaged by this disease? And down the street, he doesn't go to church as much and he's not, and so on. It's scary. It's a scary time. The Brown family was hit particularly hard by consumption. Mary Olive, the oldest daughter, dies in 1881. In 1883, Mother Mary dies from consumption. And then a few years later, their son Edwin, he gets sick with consumption. They send Edwin out west to the cool mountain air thinking that'll help because it helps a lot of people. And he's sort of hanging in there. Then it's late 1891 and Mercy Brown gets sick with consumption and it's tearing her apart fast. She's wasting away. It's not going well. So George Brown writes a letter to his son out west and says, look, Mercy's about to die, but don't come home. Stay out there. You're safer out there. There's no need for you to come home. But Edwin won't hear it. Edwin makes his way back to Rhode Island, and Mercy dies January 17th, 1892. And she's placed inside this keep right at the edge of Chestnut Hill Cemetery. Because when you die in New England, northern climates really anywhere, in the winter, the ground's frozen. They can't bury you. So they put you, as well as anyone else who's passed away, into these keeps. So you'll keep until spring. Edwin's home, and he's taken a turn for the worse. Mercy's gone. Mary's gone. Mary Olive is gone. Edwin is dying. And George is absolutely desperate. And that's when someone whispers to him, you're the victim of a vampire. Find the vampire, break the spell, save Edwin. You can do it. Vampires are always close. You always got to look close when it comes to a vampire. And so on March 17th, 3 months to the day after Mercy died, George gathered up a couple local friends and a local doctor and went to the cemetery to do the unthinkable. He exhumed the bodies of his family. Started with his daughter, Mary Olive, and dug her up, looked inside, and found her body was decomposed, as one would expect. So she's not the vampire. Then they dug up his wife, Mary. Looked inside. She too was pretty well decomposed. She can't be the vampire. That's when they look over at the keep, where Mercy's still lying. They creak open the door, and they look inside, and they're shocked because Mercy's body had moved. It had moved. They take her out, they unwrap the funeral shroud, and they see she's hardly decomposed at all. The surgeon, the doctor, cuts open Mercy's chest cavity and finds liquid blood in her heart. And that is the smoking gun proof, at least to them, that Mercy is the vampire. They take that heart out of her chest, they put it on a nearby rock, burn it up into ashes, take the ashes, mix it into an elixir, and feed that elixir to Edwin in the hopes of breaking the spell of the vampire, who must be Mercy Brown. Edwin passes away 2 months later. And the thing about her body moving, she was never embalmed. That didn't happen then. So when bodies aren't embalmed, they can do all kinds of funky things. They can sit up, they can groan, make noises, all manner of things. And liquid blood in the heart, sure, blood congeals, it liquefies back and forth as decomposition happens. And in the winter, decomposition would be a really slow process because you're practically frozen out there. All those things make sense when you look at it with a rational mind. But when your whole family is dying from an illness you can't see, that's literally eating your lungs from the inside out, you don't have a rational mind. You're operating under fear, and you're doing anything you can to try to save your son. The papers catch wind of it, of course, and the Providence Journal: exhumed the bodies, testing a horrible superstition in the town of Exeter. Bodies of dead relatives taken. Afraid of a vampire, the dead suspected of draining the vitality of the living. My goodness, what are they doing down there in southern Rhode Island? You might make fun of them, you might laugh, you might say whatever, but the reality is, those of us who are parents, if we knew we had a 1 in a million shot of saving our dying child from this horrible disease, this affliction, we'd take it too. Desperate times. And we're not thinking straight because it's a plague, because it's a scary, frightening time. And when you're afraid, you don't use the rational part of your brain. Mercy was then laid to rest among her other family members, and today, by far, the most visited grave in that entire boneyard. I want to leave you with this quote on this story anyway. It's a quote from 1879 by Moncure D. Conway, who wrote a book called Demonology and Devil Lore. And the quote is this: "I am plague. I have come from yon city where 10,000 lie dead. 1,000 were slain by me, and the rest by fear." I know it's a scary time. It's Halloween. There's an election coming up. It's a frightening time. It's a time when it's good to talk about ghosts, though, because I believe those stories, the ghostly legends, ghosts are literally a connection to our past. They're a connection to our communities, to our history. We are a product of not just who raised us, but where we were raised, where we live, and all the people that are around us. This is our past, and it's coming to our present. Sometimes events haunt us because they should haunt us. When an entire family's murdered in Amityville, that should haunt us. When graves have to get upturned in France and move all the mortal remains, that haunts us. Plagues, vampires, exhuming bodies and cutting hearts out, that haunts us because it should, because we have a chance of maybe learning something for the future. But at the very least, what we can do for certain is we can connect. We can connect with each other because we share these stories. We're not talking about the weather. Thank goodness we're not talking about politics. We're not talking about sports. We're talking about something much, much bigger. We're asking the biggest questions humans have ever asked. Is there life after death? What happens after we die? Can we still influence the living after we're gone? The big stuff. And we ask it because the veil is growing mighty thin. Halloween is just days away. And we get to carry on a tradition that's coming no matter what. No matter what, October 31st is coming Saturday, under a full moon, no less. How amazing is that? It's a holiday we get to redefine every single year. And this year, I'm curious to see what innovations we put on it, what stories we tell, and what ghosts come forth to haunt us. I appreciate you folks sharing an hour of your time tonight wherever you are, I'm grateful for the opportunity to come in and share these stories. They matter to me a lot, and I hope they matter to you just a little bit. They're all yours to keep. Take them, tell others, share them. And I'm happy to start taking some questions here. In just a second, if you just permit me a couple of shameless plugs. There I am on social media if you'd like to follow me. There's my website, jeffbelanger.com. I have a monthly newsletter. It's free. If you go to jeffbelanger.com, scroll to the bottom, type in your email address. I'll email you once a month. I'm doing these programs a lot. Even into November, I do my New England Legends program. I've got a creepy Christmas program coming out in December, not for kids. And then my Mount Kilimanjaro program's coming out in the spring. So I can tell you everywhere that I'll be. My New England Legends podcast, totally free. If you listen to podcasts, just search for New England Legends. I'll tell you a story every single Thursday. Done that for the last 167 weeks in a row, but who's counting? Also, if you have a smartphone, I have the New England Legends app, also totally free. Just search for New England Legends. And those pins represent stories that we've covered. And what's cool is you can hear the story, but you can also get driving directions. And a lot of them are in weird remote places. So in a time of social distancing, you can get out there and check out some really strange legends. That's also free. One last thing, not free though, is my 2021 Haunted New England calendar. I used to sell these things in person at these events, but this year it's only online. So jeffbelanger.com/2021 will take you to a link where you can buy the Haunted New England calendar, and 2021's got to be better. Am I right? Totally right. All right, cool. So with that, I'm going to open up this Q&A here thing, and we'll start doing some questions. And Andrew says, Jeff, the first headline you showed us spelled it Halloween, HALLOWE''E''. Is that a carryover from an older name? So yeah, All Hallows Eve was shortened to eventually Halloween. So the EN part was the other side of it. So yeah, we just got lazy over time and got rid of that last apostrophe. So yeah, I answered live. There I go. And I did that. Good. So Joanna says, Jeff, I just watched The Devil's Road today. Really good. The Devil's Road is a documentary that's airing on Travel Channel. They've been playing it all month. It's about Ed and Lorraine Warren. And I knew the Warrens since I was 12 years old. I grew up in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. They're from Monroe. So I got to go to their museum. I've interviewed them multiple times. In fact, if you watch that documentary, a lot of the audio you hear, Ed Warren talking, that's my audio from when I interviewed him in the 90s. So did I attend the Warrens Ghost School? I did not, never did. Do you have any spooky stories about objects in the Warren Occult Museum? I've been in there a couple times, actually. The one at their home. I got to see Annabelle the doll, which freaked me out even more, I think, than the average person, because the real Annabelle the doll is a Raggedy Ann doll. And my sister has the same one on her bed at home. So freaky. Ed was a great storyteller. So some of the objects in there look like anything, right? Like just look like a little shark's tooth or something. And he's like, no, that was used in a satanic ritual. So, everything in there had some kind of story, but I think Annabelle was the star. Andrew says, have you ever interviewed DeFeo, or is DeFeo too close to true crime for you? I've never interviewed DeFeo. There was a time where DeFeo from the Amityville case was trying to play up the whole he was possessed by some evil demon thing, which was just a desperate attempt to get out of a life sentence, which, demon or not, like, do not let that guy out of jail. So no, I haven't. And yeah, true crime, I get there is some crossover between paranormal and true crime, but I have nothing to ask him. I don't want to get inside his head. That's a realm I prefer to, delve in after, as opposed to try to understand someone like that. In fact, just to elaborate, when Ghost Adventures did a mini series on serial killers, and I mean, we did John Wayne Gacy, we did Dahmer, we did we did like 4 serial killers. That was a really brutal couple weeks for me, because I think about like the Nietzsche quote, gaze long into the abyss and the abyss also gazes into you. That's true, man. Like I just felt so dirty at the end of the day. I remember talking to my daughter and I was like, can we just sit down and color? Like, let's just color. I need to do something totally like nice, because this was tough. Joanna asks, where is the crumbling staircase in your cover photo? Joanna, that photo was taken by the great Frank Grace, who I do the calendar with, and it was taken at Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. Ted says, could you talk about etiquette memory in regards to ghosts? I'm sorry, Ted, I don't know much about that. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe you could reword that one and I'll try again. Jim Corbett, any ghost stories from Kilimanjaro? No, there were no. But however, when I was up there, it was a deeply spiritual experience for me. I did have a spirit experience, but I believe, I'm certain in my heart of hearts, it was a spirit I brought with me that I sensed right at the top. That was such a deeply personal thing. I wrote a memoir about it. It comes out in March. It's called The Call of Kilimanjaro. And the Maasai people of the Serengeti believe that the top of Kilimanjaro is where God dwells. You're not supposed to go up there. And the only people allowed up there are those who are deemed worthy. And getting up there, which took like 6 days, was just this grueling thing. Not really that grueling until the very end, until you're really getting up there in altitude, 19,341 feet. Who's counting? But near the top, I had an absolutely profound experience as we watched the sunrise from the rim of the volcano. And I truly felt connected, not just to my creator, but to my brother-in-law who passed away. And it was a really deeply spiritual thing. Andrew says, for the form ghosts take and your thought experiment, do you think it's more to do with how they want to be seen or how we want to see them? Andrew, that's a great question. I think it's both. I think a ghost is both a message being sent and a message being received, and you sort of cooperate on what that collectively looks like, for sure. And that's what makes it recognizable and not so frightening. Not so so frightening. So Kathleen says, can you tell us about the staircase photo? I did. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Ted says, how common is hauntings with multiple ghosts operating at different levels of awareness with physical world, sort of a way station converging? Samuel Westhouse, West Kenyon House, and Acushnet, Mass. Pulled this from Chris Balzano's Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. So yeah, so Ted, the shortest answer is I don't know, right? I don't know how ghosts operate. I know what I've seen, what I've heard, and I know what people tell me. Everything else, when you're getting into like different planes of existence and physical awareness, we're only into theory at that point. We're only into guesses or what psychics tell us. And what psychics tell us, I can't verify, which is why I tend to not get too deep into the theory stuff. I completely accept the notion of a multiverse. I accept the notion that there could be different planes, and sometimes we're just close enough that we can hear or see or feel or sense or even smell some sort of presence. I've never found a building that's haunted 100% of the time. If I did, I would buy it and I would charge you all a lot of money to come in and see it. Imagine if I could be like, I'm going to open the door and there's the ghost. The ghost is going to be like, here I am, always here. I'm bound here forever. I can't go anywhere. Jeff won't let me. I've never found a place where that's the case. What I have found is that this stuff comes and goes for reasons that are out of my total realm, control, or understanding. But I have noticed that there always has to be some sort of human person involved. Even if you put a video camera in a building all night and you get something on the video camera, there's still a human in the equation when you review the tape. So for me, I think it's very much just this combination of living people, of environment, the time of day, all that stuff. And it just comes together and sometimes something happens. Beyond that, I truly don't know. We're just guessing. Andrew asks, are there any 2021 New England Legends wall calendars left? Yes, there are. There's not a lot. There's like 25, but if you order by Friday, you'll be fine. Thank you. James Smith says, are you familiar with the two albino boys from the 1600s near North Andover and Boxford, Mass? They said the townspeople took the boys, who they feared were demons, wizards, drowned them in lake in North Andover, and then burned down the family home. People say their ghosts can be seen on Barker Road, which runs through the woods as a dirt road at Far Corner Golf Course. I've seen what has been said was the original home foundation. They also said their bones are still in the lake. My goodness, James. That is a story that I don't know how I've missed. I don't know that one, but that sounds like one I should know. And I'm going to actually take a note to look into that. because that's pretty crazy. Yeah, I don't know that one. Wow. Sounds very believable though, right? Scott asks, why unveil Halloween stamps in Milford, New Hampshire? What's the connection? Scott, I asked the very same thing of the U.S. Postal Service. I said, why wouldn't you do that in like Salem or something like that? You know, something that's known as a Halloween town. And I was told it's because Milford, New Hampshire has this huge fall festival. And there's bands and all kinds of things. The whole center of town was shut down and they just dug it. There's a post office there and they use those grounds and the big fall festival, and there were already a bunch of people that were going to be there anyway, and that's how it came together. Wasn't up to me, it was up to them. Megan asks, do you have a version of JB's story? Who's JB? Me? Jeff Belanger? Sorry, Megan, follow that up. Who's JB? Which JB are you referring to? Christine says, someone put this in the chat. Why? Oh, I just answered that. Milford, New Hampshire. Got it. That was the Postal Service. Andrew says, have you ever slept over at an allegedly haunted location? Andrea, yes, a lot of them. I've also not slept over. I've spent all night in buildings, in old abandoned asylums. I've slept over at the Lizzie Borden house. I've slept at friends' houses as a kid that were said to be haunted. So absolutely, I've done more than my time overnight in some of these alleged haunts. It's I love it. I think it's great. I'm excited. You know, when you go there, you just wonder the possibilities. Could I see something? Diane says, growing up in the city of Lawrence in the 50s and 60s, there was something called Beggar's Night, October 30th, where kids would go around to houses to try to get candy. Have you heard of this? Yep. So Beggar's Night, it's just a twist on See, it's funny, where I grew up, Beggar's Night was just another night for Halloween. Same thing. You go around asking for candy. And the origins, old Europe, people would go around begging door to door or wassailing, singing for food or whatever. Happened around Christmas. It happened wherever. So part of it stems from the Celtic festival, Samhain, where you leave out food offerings for the dead. And if someone comes through your door, they could be dead. They could be ghosts, and you don't dare offend them. So of course you give them something. So that's kind of like that whole origin of going door to door, and then trick or treat evolved from there. Nick wants to know, are you worried kids are going to take all the candy? Totally great question. Nick, number one, this ain't my first rodeo, so I won't be putting all of it out at once. And I'll sort of be hovering around the yard. And all of our neighbors, we live in a neighborhood. We have a big Facebook group for our neighborhood, and everyone sort of said, hey, let's just do this. The kids are pretty young, and I trust that their parents will be with them and they won't be jerks. If some kid takes more than his share or her share, whatever, life will go on. I'll put more out for the next one. But yeah, that's always the concern when you leave out the bucket of candy. Michelle says, thank you again, Jeff. Great storytelling. Thank you, Michelle, for being here. I appreciate it. Raylene, how has encountering ghosts changed your perspective on death and what happens after we die? So this is profound, Raylene. I was raised Catholic, and being raised Catholic, that's the baggage I carry. It just is. However, when I saw a ghost, I think it's the difference between theory and practice, right? Suddenly it gets a lot more real. And suddenly I start wondering about my own hereafter, how I want to be remembered, who I will haunt, all those kind of questions, because I do believe ghosts are a connection, and I believe we summon them. And I don't mean in some like crystal ball kind of like woo-woo way. I mean, you think about grandma right now who passed away 20 years ago. She's with you again. She's in your head. You bring her right to the present. And I think we can do that even with people we don't know. So it's really, the shortest answer is, I believe in a hereafter because of all my work in ghosts. I believe in it. I'm sure in my heart of hearts now of it because of this. Whereas before, I just sat in church and went, oh, I guess they're telling me that. But after you see a ghost, after you've been chasing them for 20 years, it's a lot more believable to me. Diane says, also, my husband's birthday's on Halloween. Happy almost birthday, hubby. Do you think he will have any special powers when he passes away? Yes, he will still drive you crazy, Diane. Uh, I don't know. He'll have the powers you give him. Halloween, though, that's a cool birthday. Oh, that's a good one. I mean, like Christmas or other like gift giving holidays, that's kind of a bummer, but Halloween, that's pretty sweet. Michelle says, Jeff, what's on your bucket list for adventures? Well, I did Kilimanjaro. That's one of the 7 summits. And I got my eye on another one of those 7 summits over in Europe. I think I'm going to have to knock out another one here before I shuffle off this mortal coil. I'm going to continue to have adventures. I love climbing mountains. I love exploring new things. I love traveling. Oh, it's one of the things I miss most. I miss getting on a plane and just going somewhere. I mean, I've been all over the world: Australia, South America, Canada, Europe, Africa. It's there's so much to see, and I just want to keep seeing and experience things. Jessica asks, do you remember if there are any haunted places in I'm not even Queechee, I forget, Vermont? Jessica, I don't know off the top of my head. I would Google it. That's how I would get started, and then go from there. Scott said, what's the most frightening you've ever been of any of your adventures in research? Scott, that happened to me I was in what's the name of the place? Right outside of Philadelphia, Penhurst Asylum. And we were up on the 2nd floor. And Penhurst Asylum is this old abandoned asylum. It's in rough shape. On the 2nd floor, there was this wooden door leaning against the wall. Those old, like 1950s solid wood doors that weigh a ton. And we're walking down the hallway, and suddenly that door gets pushed over and boom, right on the ground, and just leap out of our pants, shining flashlights everywhere, and just scared out of my mind. It was so loud. And then all of a sudden, this gigantic raccoon comes lumbering out. He had just knocked over the old wooden door, and I EVP'd myself. Rebecca says, does anything about the spirit world frighten you? Rebecca, not so much the spirit world. Living people frighten me. The scariest things that have happened to me have way more to do with living people than dead ones. However, I have seen people that get a little overcome by some of this stuff and this work. I've seen people sort of lose their grip on living their regular life because they're so obsessed with the afterlife, and that's not healthy. So I don't know. I feel like I'm a little more grounded than that. I try to keep my life balanced with exercise and friends and social things and the research and the work too. But yeah, I guess you never know when you lose your grip on something. So not so much the spirit world as opposed to just getting too obsessed with it, which is what I've seen. Ted says, theory that some sightings tied to a type of photographic memory. Oh, like, okay. So Ted, in layman's terms, we would call this, I should read the question for those who aren't watching this. So Ted's following up on the previous one, the theory that some sightings tied to a type of photographic memory, like a vivid mental projection. So again, we're talking theory. One theory is that some ghosts are like a movie that plays over and over again. And it's not there now, but it was there at one point. They also call it the stone tape theory, the idea that stone with high metallic content can literally record emotional, energetic events, just like your video camera can record it. So we don't understand it. It makes sense to me because I've heard plenty of accounts from people that have seen these things, like Gettysburg. You see soldiers marching along and then they're gone. They're not interacting. They're not looking at you. They're not waving or talking. They're just there doing what they did years ago, and then they're gone. I don't necessarily believe that they are there now, but they were there then, and you're picking up on it for some reason. There's also the flip side. There's an idea called a tulpa, which is a thought form. And the Tibetans believed that you could meditate to the point of creating a thought projection that would become reality into the world that not only you would see, but people around you would see. So yeah, I mean, those are the two theories, the idea that you can actually create some of this stuff. All things are possible, I'm sure. Nick asks, favorite episode of Ghost Adventures, if you have one? Oh my gosh, Nick. So I've worked on over 200 now. Who's counting? Ghost Adventures has been an adventure. The Penhurst story is one that I've told a lot because I felt like that one was so important, because we really, we talked about an important place, a place where horrible atrocities happened. And the hope, of course, is that by telling the story that they may not happen again in the future. But I also love Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. We did, that's the first live show we did, and I was on that one, and got to be in that incredible place. That was really cool. I like live. I like the energy of live events, live TV, because what's happening is happening. You just work with it. Andrew says, Jeff, will you ever get into voicing for audiobooks? You have such a great storyteller. People could listen for hours. Well, shucks, thanks. For that matter, any chance of collaborating with Neil Gaiman on a fictional work? Andrew, if Neil Gaiman calls me, I'm taking the call. I will take the hell out of that call. That guy might be out of my league. I did do a audiobook. My Who's Haunting the White House is available on Audible. I voiced it, and we had voice actors as well to do some of the historical characters. So if you want to hear me on an audiobook, you can always check that out. Anonymous attendee, is that a Greek name? Do you find more activity around ley lines? So, anonymous attendee, so the ley lines, tricky thing. The person who came up with the term ley lines eventually didn't even believe they existed. However, ley lines, for those who may not know, the idea is only about 100 years old or so. Someone noticed that, gee, significant spiritual places, for example, like a church, a shrine, a cemetery, they strangely seem to follow like these patterns if you look at them on a map. And could there be some sort of like invisible stream of energy underground or whatever that calls some people to say like, no, don't put the cemetery 100 feet over there or 100 feet over there, put it right here, right? And so that's the idea, that there are these like earth energies. We live on a giant magnet called Earth. If we didn't live on a magnet, we would die. Like literally the sun would cook us. So that magnetic field protects us, and it is not steady or the same in all places. So yeah, I mean, I guess that must play some sort of role. It must energetically charge certain areas more than others, and it shifts, of course. So yeah, but I mean, but where are ley lines? We could never agree on that. I mean, someone will tell you like there's a ley line here, but on whose authority? You know, so I always struggle with that when someone says like there's a ley line. Well, how do I prove that? So I always struggle with that. Megan, JB, the Connecticut vampire. The Connecticut vampire. I don't know the Connecticut vampire. There was one, because Dr. Michael Bell, who's the guy that wrote the book, if you're into New England vampires, Food for the Dead, great book. I don't remember the initials of the one that was in Connecticut though. Sorry, Megan, don't know them all. Bernadette, do you know anything about Dudley Road in Billerica? Yep. Dudley Road. Dudley Road has got so many stories. It's one of these legendary places, like the nun who hanged herself because she was pregnant by the priest, and she comes out, and there's all kinds of mysteries around that road. And what happens over time is that people sort of know it, and then more people go there looking for weird stuff, and then it just sort of starts to compound on each other. But yeah, that's a classic. Dudley Road, Billerica. Lisa asks, what's the creepiest, most active place you've ever been to? Yeah, it's tough to answer that, because I've been to like some of the most haunted places all over the world. And on the nights I went, some of the time, like nothing happens. You're just like, hey, this is like being anywhere. Other times I've been places where you go, whoa. So I was in Waverly Hills in Louisville, Kentucky. It's an old tuberculosis sanatorium. And that night it was just crazy. It was so active. So much stuff was going on. It was we saw an apparition that night, and I'm just like, this is great. Oh my God, this is the most active haunt I've ever been in. A year later, we went back and I remember walking in being like, I'm ready, let's go. Nothing. So, but that is those big abandoned creepy haunts where lots of people died. Those are kind of my go-tos. They're for sure. Andrew says, did you ever see anything or anyone in any of your overnights? Well, yeah, like, so Waverly, there was an apparition, and but otherwise, yeah, most of the time I don't see or hear or experience ghosts, but it's happened a few times, and that's something you don't forget. Kim asks, Can you tell us something interesting about your time working on Ghost Adventures? Kim, it's a lot more like a job than you would ever guess. We've got a pretty tough schedule sometimes. Sometimes we're filming 2 or 3 episodes in a month, and I have to do all the historic research I can, help them find people that will get interviewed and appear on camera and share their ghost story. It's a well-tuned machine at this point. Zach is passionate about ghosts and haunts and where we go and how we're doing these things. The network, of course, cares a lot. It's been their it's been their top-rated show for so many years. And so, it's what's interesting is just how much of like it's just this machine where everybody's doing their thing to make it happen each time. And of course, when you get to go on some of the shoots, that's fun too. But it's a lot of work. It's an incredible amount of work. Ted says, last question from me. Most haunted spots in the Bridgewater Triangle. I like the Hockomock Swamp, also the Freetown State Forest, and Assonet Ledge. Those are some of my favorites. Patricia, have you ever encountered a faceless spirit? So not me personally. I've heard stories about that, and often I think sometimes what happens is we see apparitions that don't quite have features, but you can tell it's sort of human shaped. But a faceless spirit, I have not. Michelle wants to know, who would you haunt? Michelle, I have an answer for that. I would be on the sideline of Gillette Stadium during this season's Patriots football games and being like, what did you do? What did you do? That's who I would haunt. And of course, I'd check in on my family and friends. And there's a couple people that I would totally prank, like poltergeist stuff. I would make, like, your car keys, forget it. You will never find them again. I would put them like in the blender in weird places. I have a list. It's a long list of people I would haunt. Andrew says, my wife and I are finally getting legally married on Saturday. Congratulations, legally. Halloween, love that. Hopefully it's less tragic than a Christmas wedding. Wish me luck. Good luck, Andrew. Happy wedding day. Jody, good to see you. Please bring the Ouija commercial next time. Thanks for doing this. There's a Ouija, you know what? I can't even get into it. Jody knows it'll just have to be an inside joke. Apologies to everyone else. Julie says, sitting next to my husband of 20 plus years, and during this crazy time, it's nice to think there's a hereafter. Just don't want to get there anytime soon. I agree with you, Julie. No rush for me either. Andrew, do you guys think this is similar to the Moberly Jourdain incident? Oh, that's a great one. The story where the guy slipped in time. I mean, yeah. That Moberly, that is a really good story of a time slip where these women were staying at like this I'm forgetting the details, but they were in France, and they went and they experienced like walking into a whole other time period, and it's so well documented. I have the book. I should maybe dust that one off, Andrew. Good story. Diane asks, what's your favorite ghost movie? So my daughter and I, our favorite movie is The Conjuring. We just love it. We think it's just a great horror movie. And crazy thing about The Conjuring is to know every single person being portrayed in the movie, because I grew up with Ed and Lorraine Warren. I know the whole Perron family. I know the folks that live there now. So, but I still thought it was a great work of fiction. Terry asks, are you married? Why do you ask? I am married, and I have a child, my daughter. And how do they feel about what I do? So my daughter, it's all she's known her whole life. She's 13. And I've been doing this, a lot longer than she's been alive. So it's kind of all she knows. What was really cool, I mentioned before, The Conjuring, when we filmed that thing for the Travel Channel, Devil's Road, for Ed and Lorraine Warren, we actually filmed the interview at the Conjuring house. And so when they told me, hey, we want to interview you here, I said to my daughter, I was like, hey, I got to go do this thing at the Conjuring house. You want to go? And she's like, oh my God, yes, I want to go. This is bragging rights for life with my friends. So I told the producers, I was like, yeah, I don't have childcare, so I got to bring my daughter. And they're like, oh yeah, no problem, whatever. And it was so cool. She's taking selfies throughout the building. So yeah, my family thinks it's pretty cool. Scott, best ghost movie, best Halloween movie? Nightmare Before Christmas, or is that a Christmas movie? I don't know. I love it. Best ghost movie, Ghostbusters. Charity says, we bought 6 calendars and added you on Patreon. Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And enjoy the calendars. Kathy, thank you, Jeff. This was enjoyable. Great storyteller. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. Going to keep doing them. We got lots of stuff going on. Joy says, sorry I was on the chat and not here. Thank you for another awesome night. See you tomorrow night. All right, that's right. I'm doing this again tomorrow night. If you go tomorrow night, be all different stories than tonight. Yes, thank you to the many libraries for hosting tonight. Kathy asks, is there any place haunted in Salem? Kathy, yes. A lot. The Hawthorne Hotel, House of Seven Gables, Hawthorne's home, which is in the same property as the House of Seven Gables. There's the old burial point there in town. There's other various houses. Salem's got definitely its share of haunts. McDermott here asks, how about Danvers State Hospital in Danvers, Mass? Check that out. Yeah, so there was a movie called Session 9, horror movie, actually a pretty good one, sort of more low budget, filmed at Danvers before Danvers was completely taken down and turned into condos. So I never got to check it out when it was an abandoned asylum, but I was doing this program once years ago, somewhere not too far from Danvers, and someone's like, I live in those condos. And suddenly I'm like, come up front. And I was interviewing him and I said, so are your neighbors haunted? Like, what's going on? And so I guess apparently heard a few stories. So Kim says, thank you. You're welcome. Teresa says, where have you encountered a spirit where you didn't expect one? Teresa, that's hard to answer. I mean, I never expect one, ever. So when I go, you could take me to like the most creepy haunted place ever. I don't expect something to happen because most of the time it does not. So whenever it happens to me, it's completely unexpected. I think we sometimes connect in the strangest of places, but in those cases, it's more about like family connections. You know what I mean? Like, so you visit grandma's house or something and you feel some sort of connection. I guess that would be more on the unexpected side, but it's always unexpected for me. Raylene says, thanks, Jeff, for the awesome stories and to the library. Thank you. I agree. Andrew, they were at Versailles. Yes, that's that time slip in France. That's right. I've got that book. There's a book that documented the whole thing, and I have a copy of it. It's a very cool story. Michelle says, Jeff, do you get the chance to go to Salem this year? I did, as a matter of fact, Michelle. I went for about an hour because I filmed an episode of Kindred Spirits on the Travel Channel with Amy and Adam. So I don't know when it's airing, but we did do something in Salem this year. But that was it. I was just in and out because of COVID. Nick asks, what is that next panel tomorrow? So tomorrow it's another Ghosts and Legends program. So it's the same program, but totally different stories because I'm changing them every single night. Anonymous attendee, is there haunted places in Tewksbury? Yes, indeed. In fact, if you go to the Tewksbury Library, right next door is the old Tewksbury Hospital. During non-COVID times, they used to open it up a couple times per year. I know they would allow like photographer tours where you could go in and do photography. They would do group-led tours. So there were ways to get in there legally and safely. I don't know what the status is at the moment, though. You'd have to check. But that's a great place in Tewksbury, right next door to the library. Lisa says, great talk. Thank you. What platform will we be on tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, Zoom again, but it's a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So this webinar allows for more people. Jennifer says, thanks so much. Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween to you, Jennifer. Andrew, thank you for another great evening. You're welcome. Thank you. And nope, my daughter was not the cyber bouncer tonight, but I'll let her know you asked about her. Anonymous attendee asks, well, what's it like when things get weird on Ghost Adventures, when behaviors change, crew gets angry during an investigation? It's you see it, like, you know, you get to see what happens when things get weird on Ghost Adventures. Everyone on the crew just about has had something like follow them home from one of these places. It's intense. It's long hours. You're tired. You're at your end of your tether sometimes, and then weird stuff starts happening, which just compounds on it. So yeah, everybody deals with it differently. And I don't just mean the guys on TV. I mean like the camera guys and sound folks and the production team, everybody. Any haunts in Bolton, Mass? Yeah, of course. Sorry, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'll have to Google. Anonymous, this was wicked fun. Thanks. Wicked pissa. Diana says, waitlisted for tomorrow. Oh, here's hoping. I hope you get in. And Gabriella says, do you believe in past lives? If so, could you see a ghost from your past life? I struggle. So with I believe, so past lives, I struggle with that because on the one hand, like we've been here forever, right? I believe in science. I believe that matter can't be created or destroyed, which means we've always been here. We always will be here. We're just going to change form and so on. And I believe that I'm breathing breaths of the same air that Shakespeare breathed all those centuries ago, and that there's this linear connection to everyone who came before me. But like, have I literally been here before? I don't know. That doesn't quite sit right with me. But I do believe that my DNA carries memories of everybody before me. So I kind of lean at it more that way. Whew. 63 questions answered. Folks.
Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
No, of course.
People are very engaged.
I appreciate it. And thank you folks for being here tonight. Thank you to all these wonderful libraries. I know sometimes we get zoomed out and everything else, but what a cool thing. We can't be in person, which I so sorely miss. And believe me, I can't wait till we can do that again. But I'm so grateful that we can do this because this is something, right? We're being social, we're hanging out, we're talking, and I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. Fantastic program, and good luck tomorrow night.
Thank you so much, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Same to you. Take care, everybody.